one of the things I wanted to share was that this presentation today came about really because of their rabbi in New Mexico, Rabbi Beryl Levertov, same last name as me, my dad's first cousin. And he gets all of their emails. He's always following what they're doing. And he saw that they had a presentation that was actually done for their Jewish women's group that was done by Janet. I think David was in the shadows, that one.
That's right.
But that's but it was all about this specific book, The Remnants and Photographs of the Lower East Side, which talks about Jewish immigration in the Lower East Side from Eastern Europe and how integral it is to the history of Jews in America. They both together, Janet and David, so it's Janet Russek and David Scheinbaum, have a gallery in Santa Fe. You can check their website out, photographydealers.com. And I'm hoping that you both will share a little bit more about yourselves before the presentation. If you are ever in Santa Fe, they definitely have a gallery. I don't know during Corona, but you are welcome to visit. And of course, everyone knows Santa Fe is all about art, and it's a great place to visit. So I'm going to just pass on the mic to Janet and David, and it's all yours.
Hi. Well, hello, everybody. It's nice to be with you today. And thank you, Rabbi, for that nice introduction. And I think you covered most of it. We're both photographers. We've been in Santa Fe since the late 70s. We're from Brooklyn, and we grew up in Brooklyn. And we raised our children and have done our work, our photography work here in Santa Fe, and we opened up our business in 1980. So this is our 40th anniversary of our gallery, which is entitled Scheinbaum and Russek. I was also a professor at the local college, the College of Santa Fe, where I worked for 33 years. So we have a foot in the world of education, we have a foot in the art world, and we have a foot in the business world. About 2 years ago, the book that we'll be talking about today was published. And I think what I'll do is, do you have anything you want to add, Janet? Okay, I'm gonna see if I could now share the screen like this. And you'll have to tell me if I'm doing this right. Can you all see that?
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's perfect.
That's great.
Okay, this is the cover of the book, and you'll see the cover of the book actually is designed pretty spectacularly. This is a photograph that was taken in the Tenement Museum, which I'll talk about a little more in a few minutes. But there's a piece of vellum over the picture, so it has this haze over it. And that was to reinforce this notion of our title, which is called Remnants. We, through various trips to the Lower East Side, which I'll also talk about in a minute, we realized it was rapidly changing from the Lower East Side that we grew up in. And in essence, we were trying to photograph the remnants of our memories. So the design of the book, and of course the pictures themselves, hopefully will reinforce that idea. The book was published by a publisher here in Santa Fe called Radius Books. This is kind of the frontispiece page. And you'll see here these other two names, Amy Stein Milford and Sean Cochran. The book has two really remarkable essays in it. Amy Stein Milford was the director of the Eldridge Street Museum and Synagogue, which we'll show you pictures of in a few minutes. And she grew up on the Lower East Side and is a Lower East Side scholar. So her essay is about the history of the Lower East Side and how it's evolved to today. And this man, Sean Cochran, is the curator of photography at the Museum of the City of New York. And he wrote an essay in the book about the history of photography of the Lower East Side, which is pretty exciting. Namely, I'll mention one in the 1880s. A Danish immigrant, a man named Jacob Riis, photographed the squalor of the Lower East Side, and it really was his mission to let the rest of New York City realize the conditions in which many of the newly arrived immigrants, which were primarily Jewish, Italian, Irish, and German, and the conditions they were living in. And you've all seen, I'm sure, those photographs of the tenements and the people living on their fire escapes, and 9 people to a room and 6 people to a bed. And it was Jacob Riis's photographs that you probably were looking at. And he published a book entitled How the Other Half Lives. And in a way, it was his work that we kind of had in the back of our mind when we were photographing on the Lower East Side, in a way, not to update that work, but there's some references that conditions are still not too dissimilar from what they were in the late 1800s.
Also, I'd like to say that his work made such an impression that child labor laws and health, visiting nurse services, a lot of social innovations came about because of Jacob Riis's work. It was very important.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Let's see. There we go. This I'll do quick. This is a man named David Skulkin who designed the book, and we'll just let him say hi to all of you. So we moved to Santa Fe in the late 70s, and we have 3 children. Now, when our youngest child, his name was Zach, was ready for his bar mitzvah, we decided to go back to where we bought my tallis and my tefillin, where my father bought his tallis and his tefillin, and where my grandfather bought his tallis. And we decided to go back to the Lower East Side and get Zach his tallis for his bar mitzvah. And these 2 images from Essex Street, I took not with this book in mind at all, but I just happened to photograph in 1999 this street. And you'll see the top photograph has the religious articles, and the bottom is the window of Rabbi Eisenbach's store. And the Hebrew there, it's half of the word of sofer. He's a scribe, but he also sold Judaica and Talisan and various other. I'm trying to. Oh, here we go. Okay, I just had to learn how to switch the pictures. This is Rabbi Eisenbach. He didn't like being photographed, but we bought a tallis and we became friends. My mother came with us, and it was, pretty emotional to buying our son his tallis there. But after we completed our business and the rest of the family left, I stayed behind and asked if I could photograph. And so Rabbi Eisenbach, besides working on Torahs, he also makes the inserts for mezuzah. So he's pretty much the last of a generation that's still on the Lower East Side. And as much as he's no longer on Essex Street, he is still in business. And now he's on a street called Grand Street. And he's really a remarkable man. And it's almost, this image like this could have been taken 100 years ago, in my opinion. So we wanted to show the changes. This is in the mid-2000s when we would be going back to New York a few times a year, either to visit family or for our photography business. And of course, every time we went back to visit, we needed to go get a bagel or a pastrami sandwich or some pickles. And so we would always visit the Lower East Side, and it wasn't when we bought the Tallis in 1999, but it was some years later,
2008.
in about 2008, when we really became acutely aware that things are disappearing. The real estate in this area started to skyrocket, and it was kind of being discovered by a hipster type generation. A lot of bars were opening up, a lot of clubs were opening up, the old tenement buildings were being torn down, big apartment buildings, co-ops, you all know what I'm talking about. You know, the real estate was worth so much more than the businesses, many of them in their fourth generation. And the families were just selling the buildings, and probably doing a lot better than they could have been, you know, standing in their store 7 days a week or 6 days a week. But so we started to proceed to first photograph the shops, photograph the streets, we photographed the synagogues, and that's basically what we're going to take you through in the next few minutes to share some of these highlights. Some of the places we photographed are no longer there. I would say about a third of our book, which is out in maybe almost 2 years, probably about a third of our book is gone. The places are gone, but there are still other good things happening. So this is Russ and Daughters, and this is where one would go to get their smoked fish, their anything from lox to whitefish to caviar. It's also in its fourth generation. Russ started out on a cart, and you see Russ and Daughters, and actually now it's run by his daughter. And it's still kind of the go-to place for smoked fish. My relationship to the Lower East Side, and I think a lot of people who grew up in New York, you know, the Lower East Side, I grew up in Brooklyn, but it's really where you would go for virtually any major need. If you needed a new quilt for your bed, you go to Lower East Side. If you needed curtains for your house, you go to Lower East Side. If you needed clothes for the new school year, you go to Orchard Street on the Lower East Side. Anything religious, Lower East Side. Food, Lower East Side. My grandparents would take me there regularly. My memories, they didn't like to go on the subway because it was too noisy. And I have memories of going on 3 or 4 buses from Brooklyn to get to Manhattan. I don't know how many of you probably know what I'm talking about, but just to spend 2 to 3 hours taking buses. But that's how important it was to go to the Lower East Side and not only buy the things you need, but as my grandfather would say, is buy it from your own kind, shop from our own family, from the people who know who we are. And basically that's who he related to as the owners of the stores on the Lower East Side. This is some smoked fish to make you all hungry from Russ and Daughters. Yeah, Janet's reminding me, all the places that are still there, they have websites, especially now during COVID, you could get stuff shipped to you in 24 hours. But you all live in Phoenix, you probably have stuff. We don't have any of this stuff here in Santa Fe. Strangely enough, the one exception in our Lower East Side book is this business called Acme Smoked Fish. Acme Smoked Fish pretty much makes the lox and the whitefish salad, various incarnations of smoked salmon with pepper, with pastrami. It's strictly kosher. It's been there for a long time. It covers a full block in Brooklyn. And the reason we made the exception is because they smoke the fish for most of the stores in New York and probably across the country. You've heard of Zabar's maybe in New York. I just showed you Russ and Daughters. They pretty much do the fish and they package it for these different businesses. But even in Santa Fe, when I go to Whole Foods, if I see they have smoked salmon, I look at the package, it's from Acme in Brooklyn. but it has a package on it that says Whole Foods. So they're the people. They have a full-time rabbi on staff. Most of the workers there are immigrants themselves, and they work there. Their parents had worked there, and it's a Polish, yeah, primarily a Polish community, and it's amazing to watch the process of cold smoking and hot smoking. And so even though we went into Brooklyn, we included in our Lower East Side book. As I said, fabrics were a big part. If you needed cloth for anything, or you needed slip covers made for your couch, or as I said, curtains, you would go pick your fabrics. It would be made for you. And basically in New York, this is where you go. And there's very few places left, but on Grand Street,
just
two places left, to say.
Yeah.
And they're both on Grand Street, but a whole portion of Orchard Street were all fabric stores. And this was taken 2011, and many of them were going out of business. It's worth mentioning, now we're in a new recession, but the last recession, when in New York, when the real estate market started to crash,
2008.
about 2008, for those 3-4 years, that's when we were able to do a lot of the work. Because now, of course, when the market picked up before COVID, many of these places closed. But the recession in New York kept a lot of businesses open for an extra 4 or 5 years, because all of the rampant development stopped. So we were able to capture a lot of the stores and meet a lot of the owners before they went out of business.
From 2008 to 2014, they did a lot.
Well, you could say.
Yeah, we were able to really capture a lot from 2008 to 2014. And then at 14, things changed again, and buildings came down, businesses closed. But there was a brief period where things were as they were.
You see, a lot of these businesses would only sell wholesale in the Lower East Side to many stores throughout New York. But in those last few years, they all went retail, trying to get some street business, basically. So you saw these signs that we now sell retail. You also notice the sign in Chinese. Much of the Lower East Side that we all know and remember, any of you who've ever been there or grew up there, Chinatown has really expanded and encroached onto what was the traditional, Jewish neighborhoods, Italian neighborhoods, Irish neighborhoods. If you think of Little Italy, or a place Four Corners, or the traditional Lower East Side, much of it is now Chinatown. And so it wasn't uncommon to start seeing the signs change to Chinese. Is that what you're going to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this was a old hosiery store. Basically, you could see from this what the title of Remnants. This was the common sight on the condition of these old buildings. And if you see the building right next to it on the right, you see that building has already been redone. And you could also see the awning, a piece of that awning there, and it's a Chinese restaurant. So you kind of could see that happening right in this photograph. This is right across the street from that, pretty much, on Rivington Street. And the old tailor is still there. And of course, it has those kind of the signature fire escapes that the tenement buildings are so known for. So the synagogues, there's a lot of history, of course, with synagogues that are no longer there. But there's 4 or 5 very active, well, I won't say very active, but active congregations This is the Bialystok synagogue, which is the Orthodox synagogue now. And it's still there and it's still active. It's absolutely magnificent. I mean, as much as this photograph's in black and white, the murals and the paintings and the stained glass is just over the top. The chandeliers. I mean, it's something definitely out of another era. And you'll see in some of our other pictures too. When the immigrants came over from Europe, the synagogues were created in this kind of palatial style that, from their countries, from their home countries. However, this building was not built as a synagogue. It was originally a Methodist church. And I'm going to ask Janet just to read some of the facts about this building because it's kind of fascinating.
So this building was first built in 1826 as the Willett Street Methodist Church. The synagogue purchased the building in 1905 and changed a lot of the interior from the stained glass windows, but kept a lot of it also. It's really an interesting fact that this was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And there's a section upstairs in the women's section.
And I'll show you this in a minute.
That has a hidden door.
So
the slaves were brought here to the runaway slaves were brought here and they were hidden in the attic. And then at night they would be taken down to the Hudson or the East River really, and brought up to Canada for freedom. So it's a fascinating, it has so much history from it. It also became what was basically for the Polish community and who came from Bialystok. There's one other thing that they're very proud of, and we'll get to that on the next slide.
Could you see my cursor here?
We have it.
Yeah, we can see your cursor.
All right, so up in the women's section, where I'm moving my cursor, you'll see this mural here. I'm going to show you a detail of that now here. Oh, not yet. I thought it was the next slide. This is it may be fun to mention. All of the color photographs here were made by Janet, and all the black and white photographs are mine. And of course, the book has both our photographs, but that's how you could tell who did what, if you're interested. This is another photograph Janet took up in the women's section, which is kind of very poignant, I think, having that. There's tissues basically in every row. Yeah. All right, so this is that area I was pointing to in that overall shot. This is that mural in the far side of the women's section. Now watch my cursor here. Hidden into the wallpaper here, there's a door. I don't know if you all could see that. You see that edge here. So that's the passage to the attic. And as Janet said, the slaves would be hidden upstairs during the day through this hidden door, and at night brought down to the river and put on boats and smuggled up to Canada. So if there's other places in New York that were also stops on the Underground Railroad, but this is a fact that they're very proud of, and it's, of course, it's all still there. Another fact that they're kind of proud of, which is a little weird and probably true, you know how stories evolve over time and all, but you see their memorial plaques, which I know you're all familiar with. You'll see here where my cursor is, you'll see Max Siegel. And Max passed here in April in 1947. And right underneath, you'll see Benjamin Siegel. So Benjamin Siegel is Bugsy Siegel. You might even know that name from the old days of Murder Incorporated and all that. And the story the shamans told us here in the temple is that the tradition amongst the mafioso is that a father should never see their son die. So they killed his father in April, and then they murdered Bugsy in June. And therefore they were able to honor that code amongst the mafia, that the Max did not have to live to see Bugsy assassinated. But they were early members of this Bialystaka shul. This is a very incredible synagogue on Broome Street. It's the Kehila Kedosha Yanina. I don't know if you're familiar with any Greek Orthodox Jews or Greek Jews, and not everyone even knows there is such a community of Greek Jews. But the Kehila Kedosha Yanina synagogue is a Greek Jewish synagogue. It's a very understated building on Broome Street, stuck in between some other buildings. This is taken from the women's section up on top, looking down at the ark. You'll see, excuse me?
It's also considered a museum, and what you see on the walls are photographs of the original families, also a lot of items that they brought over from Greece with them. So there are cradles and baby pictures and um, fantastic pieces of cloth and prayer shawls and all kinds of religious items. And it is run on Sundays, every Sunday from 1 to 4. You can go and visit, and that's when it's really run as a museum. And if you do get a chance to go to the Lower East Side, it's fascinating, and the people are so warm and welcoming, and it's an amazing experience. The other incredible part of this is that they have a very special Torah.
I'll show you in a minute, but I just want to say that. So they considered Romanot Jews, Roman Jews, Romanot with an OTE at the end. Their Hebrew is a little different. Their writing is a little different, and their customs and way they practice is almost, you'd recognize everything if you went in, but things are slightly different. It's fascinating story.
Can I unmute you?
A fascinating story is the story they would tell is that there was a slave ship returning from the Holy Land back to Rome when they were overtaken by a storm off the coast of Greece. And the captain of the slave ship basically said, if you could swim to land, you're free. And the slaves jumped ship and they swam and made it to land at a place called Yanina in Greece. And they settled there and created their Jewish practice, as I said, which is slightly different from what we might consider traditional Jewish practice. But they built synagogues, they had communities. And unfortunately, during World War II, the Nazis desecrated their synagogues and turned them into stables. And that's when most of the Romanot Jewish community from Greece emigrated to America. There's about 500 families across the US that are members of this congregation, but they come back to New York for life cycle events, bris, bar and bat mitzvahs, funerals and such. People will still return to the synagogue for important events. Janet mentioned the Torahs. This is the shamus who was on one of these Sunday afternoons, who was showing us the Torahs and this beautiful Torah that they have that was from Yanina in Greece. It's a 16th century Torah that they brought over from the original synagogue that they had in Yanina, and it's still used today, and it's in this magnificent hand hammered metal case. It's just a very powerful experience to be able to stand in front of these scrolls and hear their story. They're Greek in every way. They also celebrate all the Greek holidays, and I know they return to Greece every year as a Jewish community back to the village of Yanina. So if you ever are in New York or have an opportunity, visiting this synagogue and hearing their story and learning about their practice and Romanov jewelry is kind of pretty fascinating. Were you going to add to that?
I was going to add that both of the synagogues are now on the designated New York City landmarks that we showed you, the Kehillah Kadosha and the Bialystaka.
Yeah.
So I think being a landmark in one way has saved them from destruction.
And this synagogue called the Eldred Street Synagogue. You heard me mention at the beginning of this talk that the woman who was the director of this museum is the author of our book. The Eldred Street Synagogue was the first synagogue that was built in the United States by the newly arrived immigrants. As the first wave of immigration took place and people settled in the Lower East Side, the funds were raised to build this synagogue.
1887.
It was 1887. And again, the synagogue was absolutely palatial, magnificent building. It was totally in the 20th century, not only in disrepair, there were pigeons living in it. The roof had caved in, everything was broken, the stained glass was broken, the place was virtually abandoned. When the Jewish, what I would call a modern Jewish community from the Lower East Side, raised the millions of dollars necessary to bring this building back to its original magnificence.
It was Amy's.
And
Amy's
again,
efforts.
Amy Stein Milford led that campaign to really restore this magnificent shul. One of the very powerful things here is this giant, I'll use my cursor, this giant stained glass circular window that's there was designed, I don't know if you all have your art history hats on, but who did it?
A contemporary Kiki Smith, who's a sculptor and painter, drawer. She designed this window, and we do have a picture.
I'll show it to you in color in a minute. But Kiki Smith is a name of contemporary art. She designed this stained glass for this renovation. So these days, people wonder. It's the Eldred Street now literally is smack in the middle of Chinatown, and people say, "How come there's a synagogue in the middle of Chinatown?" But they don't realize that this was the heart of the Jewish community in the 19th century. But this too is definitely worth a trip to see this synagogue. It's absolutely magnificent. This is a photograph of that stained glass, and it's so powerful when you stand in front of it. It sits right over the ark, and when the light comes in, it does glows. It's definitely the heavens coming to earth. It's just magnificent. So, as I said, the Eldred Street Synagogue is right in Chinatown now, and they do a lot with education, Jewish education, but they also do a lot for the community. And they started this block party every year called Egg Rolls and Egg Creams. And it's the whole street is closed off, and there's people making egg creams and knishes and selling pickles, and there's people making egg rolls and selling egg rolls, and then there's musicians playing Chinese music, and then there's Jewish musicians doing klezmer music, and there's Chinese kids and Jewish kids, and it's just a beautiful combining of the communities where the shul plays this important role in the Lower East Side. A year after this picture was taken in 2012, and the next year in 2013, they actually added a name. It was no longer called Egg Rolls and Egg Creams. It was called Egg Rolls, Egg Creams, and Empanadas, because now there's a big Dominican community moving into this area. So they've added a Spanish flavor, Chinese, and Jewish. And it's just a really good feeling thing, and it really bonds the community together. And it places the shul within the context of the contemporary community. These are just some, I don't know, again, we're in Santa Fe, they can't get egg creams here, but maybe in Phoenix you can. So I don't know, like when I look at this picture, I start to drool. I mean, there's the You Bet chocolate syrup, there's the salsa bottles, but I don't know. And then of course, Katz's. The food places that are still in business are flourishing. This is literally minutes after Katz's opened one morning. They let Janet and I come in and photograph a few hours before they opened one day, just so we could photograph behind the counters and some of the workers and some of the food preparation. But of course, once they opened, we stayed. But although it's not strictly kosher, so I don't want to, get in any trouble here, but it's still the go-to pastrami sandwich, so it's, again, I'm going to have to get something to eat as soon as I'm finished with this today. And this is interesting. During World War II, the owners of Katz's, they had two sons in the military. And they would send food. And they came up with a saying, and they have signs all over Katz's. It says, send a salami to your boy in the army. And people would send salamis through Katz's to the veterans overseas. So it wasn't uncommon for people in France and Germany during the war to get a salami package from Katz's. And they still ship salamis all over the world, basically. Some people enjoying some hot dogs and knishes and I don't know what else. I can't see. I'm sure pastrami or a corned beef sandwich. And celery tonic. I don't know. Again, I can't get celery tonic in Santa Fe. You might be able to get Dr. Brown's, in Arizona, but need that celery tonic. Okay, Jonas Schimmel's been there over 100 years, fourth generation. A knishery. They named the word. You've heard of a bakery? Well, this was a knishery. And they've been making knishes on the Lower East Side for years. They're still there. They're still in business. Potato and kasha knishes. But now they also make the exotics, I don't know, cheesecake knishes, broccoli knishes. I don't know, things you wouldn't want to eat, as far as I'm concerned. But potato and kasha, still baked knishes, not the flat fried ones, a real nice baked knish. It's very understated, and they too are still in business and they ship. Kosars, I don't know last time you had a bialy, but bialys, there's very few places now that still are making good bialys. And as I've learned, there's very few places that could exist by just making bialys, because now Kosar's bialys is called Kosar's bialys and bagels, because they're also making bagels, which you could exist on making bialys and bagels. But they're still using the recipe from the 1800s, making bialys, and they make pretzel boards. I don't know if any of you remember a big onion board, like an onion roll, but on a flat, big board. It's called a pretzel board. They're still cooking in the original ovens, and they're still incredible, and they ship as well. This is interesting, kind of not. This is basically what's happening. These were taken at the Streitz Matzah factory. The Streitz Matzah factory was one of the last actual factories of the old world in production. It occupied a square block of the Lower East Side up until about 3 years ago. And in 3 years ago, the building was sold. The whole building was not raised, and right now it's a skyscraper condominium apartments. But Streitz, the picture on the left is one of their old ovens, and they were still making, again, a full-time rabbi on staff, and they're still making not shmera matzah, but they're making factory matzah in as close to the old way as possible. It was, conveyor belts everywhere. It was just walking into a throwback of 100 years ago. Things were pretty much held together with duct tape and wire. You could see they were kept it going until the very, to the last straw. I don't know if they were able to fix these machines anymore, but we were able to spend a day photographing the whole process of making matzah from beginning to end. They also did all the packaging in this building and made the boxes and the labels, and it was an amazing operation. They're still in business, but they're no longer in the Lower East Side. I think they're upstate or in New Jersey now. Mm-hmm. Gus's Pickles is gone, but there's a place now called the Pickle Guys, and the Pickle Guys is run by former employees of Gus's Pickles. But you all know kind of the stereotypical photographs of the pickles in the barrels all over the streets. And there was a time where evidently there were 100 purveyors of pickles in the Lower East Side. At the time we started photographing in the early 2000s, there were 2. And for some reason, the Board of Health in New York outlawed pickles in barrels because the barrels were able to perpetuate bacterial growth. Wooden barrels. So they had to switch to these plastic barrels, which don't have that same romantic feeling as the old wooden barrels, but this is the modern equivalent. But again, Gus's is gone, but there is still a pickle place, and it's amazing. They do all kinds of pickles, fruit and vegetables. Around Passover, they make horseradish fresh. They're still very much involved in the community. This is kind of 2011, and this was not an uncommon sight. This is what we were confronted with, and really a picture like this is why we did this book. We saw places were closing, places were going out of business. As I said, the real estate was worth more than the businesses. Even though there were 2, 3, 4 generations in the family, it just wasn't making sense for all these families to stay open. And businesses being boarded up, locked up, gated up, garbage, graffiti. It was the end of an era, and it really was what we tried to see, how much is still left of the Lower East Side that we had in our memories. So as I said, even now, just 2 years later, so many of the places we photographed are already gone. And this bakery as well, East Broadway Bakery, it's gone now. Black and white cookies, a pound cake. I could make you all really hungry right now, even with this. They sold all the rugelach, all the stuff we babka, challah. But again, there weren't enough people in the community to keep these places going. And as I said, it kind of was, the end was in sight. Very common that you could see this building was a former synagogue It's basically abandoned, turned for a while artist studios. And then again, these old buildings are in terrible shape, the tenements, and except for the ones that are, being renovated and fixed up, they're basically just kind of falling on total disrepair. The Beth Hammerdash Synagogue, unfortunately, this was 2012. Let's see, our book came out 2 years ago. Just when our book came out, this building burnt down to the ground. It's gone. Some kids, I don't know, they don't even know if it was done maliciously, but some kids were playing, and I don't know if they were homeless, but they built a little fire to, who knows why. In any case, the building was totally destroyed. This was one of the very historic Orthodox synagogues, and they were in the process of a fundraising campaign to rebuild the synagogue like the Eldred Street Synagogue, and they were on their way to raising those funds when it was burnt to the ground. So this whole congregation has now been displaced. And the last photograph in the book is very close to the cover of the book. And again, if any of you have an opportunity to get to the Lower East Side, I encourage you to visit the Tenement Museum. The Tenement Museum occupies 2 tenement buildings. And what they've done is they've recreated the tenements as they were when the immigrants arrived. And as I said in the beginning, they made one apartment a Jewish apartment, one apartment an Italian apartment, one apartment an Irish apartment. And you really can see the mix of cultures and how people lived side by side. Many people did piecework for the garment district, the sewing. So, they recreated the rooms, the bedroom, sewing room, kitchen, bath. It's really an amazing job. And if you want to kind of walk down memory lane or experience the era that made the Lower East Side the historic and important area it is, the Tenement Museum is a great first stop on the Lower East Side before you go get your pastrami sandwich. And I think that's it.
Is that because they don't allow food in the museum? You got to go to the museum first.
No, but they don't sell food. I don't think they allow food either, but.
First of all, thank you both so much. That was, I actually want to buy the book now. Is that something that we can, that just to share with everyone, what is the best method to purchase that?
Probably the least expensive way is to get it like on Amazon or something like that. If you wanted to have us sign it or something like that, then you could buy it from us, and it probably be $5 more. But if you go to our website, which is photographydealers.com, photography dealers with an S at the end, one word. That's our gallery. And then on our website, there's a section that has for books. And if you want to buy the book there, then we could inscribe it for you or sign it for you. But then we'll charge you again. It'll maybe ultimately be $10 more, because it would be a little more than Amazon, and we would charge you for shipping. Amazon has free shipping, so I don't know. You could do it any way you like, but it is available.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions for either Janet or David? You can unmute your mic.
Where in Brooklyn are you folks from?
Flatbush.
What part?
And East New York. Well, I grew up on East 86th Street, which is kind of East New York. But then I grew up in the projects called Vanderveer on Nostrand Avenue and Foster Avenue. And there was the Vanderveer projects. And Janet grew up
sort of near Kings Highway and Church. I guess you could tell where we grew up by the high schools we went to. I went to Tilden, And David went to Erasmus.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's probably what
Kind of-
you
that's-
people
that's
want to
kind
know.
of where you
Where you
met.
went to high school.
Yes, I went to Midwood.
Oh, Midwood, all right.
Yeah, we know a lot of people that went to Midwood as well. Yeah.
And I did have another question. David, why did you choose to work in black and white rather than color?
Well,
Well, you always were.
I work in black and white primarily, and so that's the way I photograph. And I do some work in color when for other subject matter, but you know, if I'm just going to photograph something, I'm typically photographing in black and white. I still use film. I still work in the darkroom. I also do digital work. And basically when I work in digital work, that's when I'm working in color. But when I'm working on a typical, you know, project like this, my go-to is what I know. And basically I'm loading my film with my camera with black and white film. And this was a very nice collaboration because Janet has been working in color for years. She also, for a while, you know, when we both always worked in black and white almost exclusively for a long time. But in the last 10 years or so, I think most Janet's work is primarily color. So it actually made this a very nice way to collaborate with each of us working in a medium that we're comfortable with. But
also, I think the black and white, I think David really wanted to bring back the image of the Lower East Side as it was, and as it was in the 1800s, the early 1900s, and the history of that area in the history of photography is all black and white. So I think it was also a sense of nostalgia and staying with the history of the medium.
So for this presentation, you had to digitize the black and white prints, right?
yes, basically I scanned. I make black and white prints in the darkroom, but then to do this presentation, I could scan those prints, turn them into digital files, and then make the presentation. Where Janet's photographs were already digital files.
Right. It was an excellent presentation, so thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for your patience and participation. And of course, thank you to Rabbi Lev for, well, the more we're realizing what he does for your community, it's amazing. And our hearts go out to the work you do. It's fabulous.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sheldon, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted your mic.
Yeah, I'm stuck trying to do a chat.
Oh.
My wife and I, maybe in the early 1900s, we would go to New York a lot from Baltimore. And there was a big Apple tour that took you through all the Lower East Side and all those places. And I remember there was nothing like, it was nonstop eating. And Gus's Pickles was there.
Yeah.
Barrels outside, but and all kinds of other stores, but and a lot of Chinese markets as well.
Yeah.
So it's a great place to visit.
Yeah, I think we photographed here for like a 10-year period. I think I gained like 40 pounds during the years we're photographing there. I'm still trying to work some of them off. You know, I'd photograph for a half hour, get a knish. Photograph for another half hour, get some rugelach. Photograph, go get a sandwich. I just photograph and eat day after day.
A good area to photograph. It's a good thing you're not into nature.
He was very happy.
Yeah, I was very happy.
Ellen, you had a question?
Yes, two. Did you say you could take tours of the Bialystoker Synagogue, and do they actually have services?
First of all, yes, I'm going to answer.
Okay.
At the Tenement Museum, there are tours of that museum.
Yeah, I've been there.
Across the street from where the Tenement Museum is, there's a tour company that does walking tours. There's a walking tour of the Lower East Side. There's a one walking tour called the Jewish Heritage of the Lower East Side, and that includes visiting the shuls that are still operating and the locations. of the ones that are not. There's an eating tour that they do of the Lower East Side, which goes to all these places. So it's right across the street. And if you ask in a tenement museum, say, how could I get to see all the shuls or whatever, they will point you in that direction. Or, of course, if you go online and Google this, you could do it on your own as well. There, you know, unless it's Shabbos, you know, there's someone, you know, you could probably go and get into these buildings on your own, you know, during the week.
Okay, and they actually have service.
You wouldn't have someone necessarily giving you the
explaining everything. Yeah. My grandmother's from Bialystok, and we were just there 2018 to retrace where they live. Well, unfortunately, we couldn't go where they lived because that was bombed by the Germans. But we did find a statue that was in a picture that we have, and we put our children in the same positions as their cousins around the statue.
So beautiful.
Well,
anyway,
I actually used to go every holiday of Shavuot, which is this coming weekend.
Yeah.
I would walk from Brooklyn with a police escort to Bialystoker Synagogue.
Oh.
So one of the things that Chabad in Brooklyn does is they walk to all these synagogues throughout the entire 5 boroughs and provide some holiday cheer. So I didn't want to go somewhere close. I walked to the Lower East Side.
So you've been there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
I did not know about that door for the Underground Railroad. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's right there. It's funny because you mentioned Shavuot. I received an email this morning from the Greek, Yanina, the Kedosha Keith, for their Shavuot services this weekend.
Are they
open? Again, all these shuls are still very active and very much a part of the Jewish fabric of New York.
Nice.
And especially important that they were made to be, that they were now part of the historic landmark, which will preserve them, which is amazing because a lot of the other ones, the photograph that we showed you of a old synagogue with a no parking sign now, the second story of that building collapsed. So there's no way that they could bring it back and it'll probably be torn down.
So what Janet's saying too is that these shuls, as much as the congregations might be dwindling because of a change of community, the buildings will now be there forever. And they will be preserved.
Government protection?
Sorry?
Yeah,
they're protected as landmarks. So.
Now, that doesn't mean that that there'll be enough money raised to keep on supporting them, but it's designated as a landmark, so there are some protections.
That's pretty amazing. Any other questions that anyone had? If you do have a question, just unmute your mic.
Yes, Rabbi, this is Rhea Edelson. I just have a quick question. When is that festival that's done by the Eldridge Street Museum?
It's usually in June. You'd have to Google the Eldridge Street, but I think it's like the second weekend in June, or it might be the first weekend. It's the same time every year. So it is in June, and maybe Google the Eldridge Street Synagogue and it will come up when it's scheduled. It's such especially if you have kids to bring, but it's such a joyous event.
Thank you.
You'd love it.
I have a cousin who lives down there. His daughter actually is going to the School of Design down there, and she's sheltering right now with somebody in Chinatown. So she'd be very interested in going.
Yeah. Well, the Eldridge Street is run as, there are services and there are services, but it's really run as a museum as well. The lower floor is preserved as the way it was, very, very simple. And there's also exhibits of different items related to the original community. And it's open daily for tours. It's an amazing place. And the fact that it reaches out to all of the community now, the Dominican, the Chinese, the very, there truthfully aren't very many Jewish people living in the Lower East Side anymore. But the Eldridge Street Synagogue is just incredible, worth a visit. And by the way, we have a lovely friend here, Brenda Edelson. Are you related?
You have, did you say you have a cousin, Brenda Edelson?
A friend here named Brenda Edelson from Baltimore.
No, I don't think
Maybe
so.
she's related. Okay.
Don't think so.
You'll have to make some inquiries.
Right.
You might need to make a trip to Santa Fe now.
Well, it's a place that I haven't been to, so want to go.
Yeah, you'll have to ask them which galleries to go visit. Is it just a curious question, David? Is Santa Fe sort of open for business that people are walking into galleries, or
No, Santa Fe is still pretty closed up. The galleries are not open. Museums are not open. We work privately by appointment anyway, but we're not doing business. We're just doing our own photography during these few months. Santa Fe is just starting. It's still been curbside pickup for everything, for groceries. You could go in the stores, but you could also order online and pick it up, and they bring it out to your car. A lot of the restaurants in the last week have reopened, also only for curbside takeout, things like that. So no, the answer is we're not really open yet, and I have to say I'm glad about it. I think the community as a whole, the community has been very well behaved, and I think we're benefiting from everyone's discipline. So
nice?
That's not to say everyone's getting itchy, but still, I think thinking it's going to take a little longer for this, right? A lot longer, probably.
Yeah,
If there's no more questions, I want to thank all of you for tuning in, and I want to thank you, Rabbi, for inviting us to spend time with you. So
thank you so much. If you haven't been looking at the chat, you'll see you've had so many people that have thanked you and had memories because of it. So thank you so much. This was a really amazing presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I will mention that the essays in the book, and also with every place that we photograph, there's a few paragraphs on the history of that, which is really nice to read as well. I'm sorry we don't have that online.
Yeah, but maybe when also, it's not about buying the book,
Right.
but I'm going to guess the book is in a local library or two, and maybe when we all could go outside again, you could just go and see it at the library. So
No, I plan on buying it so I could share my copy.
all right.
That's
We'll-
good.
All right, well, sei gesund. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right.
For those of you on tomorrow, we're having Robert Tuckman. I might be pronouncing his last name correctly. Steve, you want to jump in on that one? Who is Steve Meyer's son-in-law. He is going to be speaking about
You pronounced it right. I couldn't find the unmute button.
I did do it correct?
Yeah, Tuckman.
Okay, perfect. So he is going to be presenting about the future of the entertainment world. This is his specialty. He's an entrepreneur that in business was all about providing people the VIP entertainment experience. So with all of the details, I don't know if anyone here follows the NBA, the National Basketball Association, but one of the things that they're talking about is possibly playing the rest of the season and the playoffs in Orlando in Disney World's sports complex, whatever that means to us. But the future of sports and entertainment and all of that is very different and will be different. And he's going to share his thoughts on that and a little bit about himself. He actually has a podcast that he'll share about as well. It's all about success. And I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully you'll tune in. Following tomorrow's presentation, we're going to take a break for the holiday of Shavuot. So Thursday and Friday, we won't have anything, but we'll pick back up on June 1st, which is a Monday. If you have an artist or an author or a presenter, whether it's family or friend or someone you don't know, I'm happy to reach out to the ones you don't know. Please do send me an email, and we'll get some good presenters for June and as long as we need. Thank you all for tuning in.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is that a couple still there? They're photographers?
No,
Is
but
that-
they're not on here.
No.
They're going to the corned beef sandwich. That's what he said.
No, my niece called. I haven't talked to her for 50 years during the thing.
Because
So,
of the book?
no, no. See, I did large format photography, and I did the Lower East Side. I did
Oh.
photography like that. So
I can share with you their contact information. If you send me an email or a text
Okay.
message or call me, I'll share with you their
I
contact.
will.
Yeah, that's actually pretty neat.
Okay, because I did that. In fact, I have a degree and a minor in photography. I did fashion design.
Wow. All right. I know we went long today, so I'm going to let
you.
everyone be. If you'd like to schmooze, you're welcome to. I am going to tune out in just a moment. I'm going to teach
Thank
a
you,
class.
David.
Thank you very
for
much.
joining.
Okay.
Thank you all
Bye-bye.
for joining. Ria, nice to
Bye-bye.
see you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Jennifer as well. Herb and Ethel, Shoshi, David, Sheldon, Bella, Mel and Rosemary. I'm just saying hello, Sharon. You as well. It's nice to start seeing. It's all because of Elaine. We have to thank Elaine Cates.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. This was terrific. Have a wonderful Shavuot.
Thank
Very,
you,
very
Sheldon.
good.
Well, I'll hopefully see you tomorrow, Sheldon.
Oh yeah, I'll be back tomorrow.
And again, just to remind everyone, I'll remind again tomorrow, Yisker is on Saturday this year. And if you don't have a prayer book, I'm going to be sending out an email that has the text that you can do it on your own at home. And
Rabbi,
yes.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
my ex-wife, her uncle was the head of the countermen's union in New York, and I used to go to New York almost every week with her. We went to Kansas. We all went all over. It's unbelievable.
So
And
this
my
was a
favorite place
good memory lane.
Yeah,
Good memory
Yana
lane.
Schimmel's Knish Bakery.
I like that it was called the Knishery.
No, it was Yana Schimmel's Knish Bakery.
Yeah.
It
All
was
right.
good.
Take care, everyone. We'll
Take
see you
care.
tomorrow, hopefully. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.